Was a night of outrage and angry protest in Minneapolis after a brutal video released of an unarmed, handcuffed George Floyd being arrested, which ended up in his death. This is a vicious act that I don't really even want to show you, but we have to show you a few minutes of this 10-minute video.
There's water or something. Please. Please. I can't breathe, officer.
Now, you know, one has to ask oneself, we keep seeing this, so what are we missing as Americans and human beings? Now, this officer had been on the force for 19 years. He's been involved in 3 other police shootings. A series of complaints have been filed about him, but it didn't result in discipline. And I don't understand how this continues to happen. This happened in Ferguson, right? Because there were officers there who should not have been on the force. So what are we missing here? What is happening here? How many times do we need to see this before it says, hey, if you're not going to check the people you're giving the job to, then don't give the job to them? I mean, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm crazy. What do you think, Joy?
You're not crazy. This is an intractable problem that we have in this country that just doesn't want to go away. And, you know, I was going to come out and say, isn't it great? At least the one good thing about it is that we have video cameras and we have proof of what's going on. 20 years ago, we wouldn't even see this. And God knows what was going on then. But then I was reading the story, and the cops had body cams on that were activated. There were people on the street who were videotaping the proceedings, or whatever you want to call this. And there were actually people calling the cops out. So even with all of that, they did not stop putting their foot on his neck the way they did. You know, it doesn't help. I mean, I hate to bring Trump into this, but it doesn't help that the President of the United States says things like, don't be so nice. Remember when he said that? I don't like that. Yeah. There's this feeling that it's open season on these people. It's very frustrating. I don't know what else to say about it at this point. There are no words anymore. It's got to be stopped.
Well, what do you think of this? Can anyone explain to me, maybe, Sonny, you can take this one, how a knee is an accepted technique on somebody's neck? I mean, do you know of any police? Is it in the bylaws that said this is one of the accepted things you can do to people? Sonny?
No, not to my knowledge, and my understanding is that he had his knee on his neck for 9 minutes. And so what I saw on that tape was a murder of an unarmed black man. And it's just an example of the double standard that we see in policing and that we see really across this country. I mean, in Minneapolis, black people make up about 18% of the population, yet 40% of the arrests. And they're usually for non-violent offenses. This man was stopped allegedly for an alleged forgery, and alleged, I might add. And so you're saying, you know, we're seeing that black people in Minneapolis are arrested at 9 times the rate of a white person for non-violent offenses. That says something to me. And I think, you know, when we talk about politics and we talk about Joe Biden's selection for a vice presidential pick, that is why the black community has said that Amy Klobuchar is a non-starter for them. Because in many respects, from 1999 to 2007, she declined to prosecute over 24 cases involving police killings of unarmed people. And so when you look at that, you look at that systemic problem that occurs there, you know, black people at this point are saying we are being disproportionately affected and targeted by the police.
And this is not new. I mean, this is not new. And can anybody tell me what a forgery in progress could possibly be? What is that?
Not sitting in a car. Not sitting in a car. I mean, was he writing a check at a bank? Was he at a store? He was sitting in a car.
Megan, what's your take on are we all just so frustrated people are just losing their minds in the streets, you think?
Yeah, I mean, there was huge amounts of protesters that took to the streets last night, and I think people are sitting in their homes and seeing what is blatantly a murder of a man on camera. And George Floyd, I watched the entire video. I know we didn't want to show the entire thing, but it's very graphic. It's very violent. The police officer has his knee on his neck. In the video, there are bystanders screaming that he can't breathe. He says, "I can't breathe." He asks for water. And then you see his body go limp, and then you see them dragging him, and you see liquid in the spot where he was because he has clearly been suffocated. It is very violent, very. And I think when you're sitting at home and seeing a blatant murder of an unarmed black man on video, you can understand why people are reaching a fever pitch, because it doesn't seem like this is stopping. And it's not just happening in Minneapolis, it's happening all over the country, everywhere. This is a systemic problem nationally. And what's interesting on top of that is ABC had released footage this morning of George when he was originally arrested, and he's not resisting and he's not struggling. They handcuff him and take him to the side of a wall, and he's being very compliant in every way. So I think the question that so many of us have is, how do you go from being someone who's not resisting arrest, who seems to be completely complying with police officers, to having your neck suffocated 9 minutes later and you dying? And I think these police officers should 100% be on trial for murder. They are clearly already on trial in the court of public opinion, but I don't know how much more communities across the board, not just African-American communities, but Americans in general, can withstand this, especially at this moment in time when there's so much anger and so much frustration. And I really worry about these kind of riots going across the country, because I just don't think Americans can handle this anymore. It's just so blatant and egregious. And, you know, apparently if you are a police officer, and I would like to say they're great police officers everywhere, it's not a blanket statement, but when you see people like this who are just going to murder someone in broad daylight, it obviously puts a mark on all of them.
Yeah, it makes it very, very hard. You know, it's one of the reasons I didn't want to show this, because what happens is when people show it over and over and over, I just get angrier and angrier. And I don't want to be angry. I want to be proactive. I want to find a way to figure out, how do we make police departments around the country understand that they can't continue to hire these people, because the outcome is not going to be good for any of us. So we have to figure this out, whether it's here in New York, you know, or whether it's in Minneapolis, or whether it's in Miami. This has got to stop. And the fever pitch that it's reaching, I think we need to quell it. We need to figure out a way to dampen it so we can fix this before we go too far.